Tonight, we travel back to a world that many people still remember, and many younger people can scarcely imagine. A world without smartphones, without Wi-Fi, without Google, and without social media. A world where finding an answer meant opening a book, where meeting friends required planning in advance, and where getting lost on a journey was simply part of everyday life. So dim the lights, settle comfortably beneath your blankets, and together, let us step back into the surprisingly recent past, to discover what life was really like before the Internet. Before the Internet, mornings were remarkably different. For millions of people throughout much of the 20th century, the day did not begin with the glow of a smartphone screen. There were no notifications waiting impatiently to be checked. No overnight messages. No endless stream of headlines from around the world. Instead, many people awoke to the sound of a mechanical alarm clock. These clocks often sat faithfully on bedside tables, ticking softly throughout the night. Their alarm bells could be startlingly loud, sometimes causing sleepers to leap from their beds in surprise. Others woke to the sound of a clock radio. By the 1970s and 1980s, clock radios had become a familiar presence in many homes. Families awoke to local radio presenters cheerfully announcing the weather, reading headlines, and playing music. For countless people, the radio remained an important companion throughout the morning. In kitchens across the world, radios played while breakfast was prepared. News bulletins informed listeners about traffic conditions, political developments, and local events. The morning newspaper also played an essential role. Long before smartphones placed the world's information into our pockets, newspapers arrived physically at homes every day. In many neighborhoods, newspaper delivery boys and girls rose before dawn. Riding bicycles through quiet streets, they tossed rolled newspapers onto front porches with remarkable accuracy. The sound of a newspaper landing on a doorstep became a familiar part of everyday life. Many adults developed cherished morning routines. Some would retrieve the newspaper while still dressed in pajamas. Others would brew coffee or tea before settling into a favorite chair to read the latest news. Reading the newspaper was rarely rushed. Unlike today's rapidly changing news cycle, newspapers encouraged slower consumption. People might spend 30 minutes, or even an hour reading articles in detail. International events, local politics, sports scores, weather forecasts, classified advertisements, comic strips, and editorials all formed part of this daily ritual. For children, mornings before the Internet could feel very different as well. Without tablets or smartphones competing for attention, children often spent breakfast talking with parents or siblings. Some listened to morning cartoons on television if time allowed. Others prepared school bags, checked homework assignments written carefully in notebooks, and hurried outside to catch school buses. School preparation itself required more organization. There were no school apps sending instant reminders. Parents often relied upon printed calendars pinned to kitchen walls. Important dates were written by hand. Forgotten homework assignments could not easily be retrieved from online portals. If a child left an assignment at school, there was often little that could be done. Weather forecasting was also considerably less precise. Today, millions consult weather applications that provide hourly predictions, satellite imagery, and minute-by-minute rainfall estimates. Before the Internet, weather forecasts primarily arrived through newspapers, television broadcasts, and radio reports. Meteorologists appeared during evening television news programs, standing beside large weather maps. These forecasts were useful, but they lacked the astonishing detail available today. As a result, many people simply looked outside. Observing clouds, checking the wind, or stepping outdoors to feel the temperature remained common habits. Some older individuals claimed they could predict weather changes based upon aching joints or changes in animal behavior. Whether these methods were scientifically reliable remains uncertain. Nevertheless, they formed part of everyday life. Morning communication also looked. For much of human history, finding an answer to even the simplest question required patience, persistence, and often a considerable amount of effort. Today, if we wish to know the capital of Mongolia, the release date of a particular film, or the meaning of an unfamiliar word, we simply reach for a smartphone. Within seconds, search engines provide millions of answers. Before the Internet, however, knowledge was not instantly available. Instead, information had to be actively sought. And one of the most important places in any community was the local library. Libraries occupied a central position in pre-Internet society. Far more than quiet buildings filled with books, libraries functioned as gateways to knowledge. Students, researchers, professionals, and curious citizens all depended upon them. A visit to the library often required planning. People frequently traveled considerable distances to reach the nearest branch, especially in rural communities. Once inside, visitors entered a world governed by silence, order, and an unmistakable smell of paper, ink, and aging books. Before computerized catalogs became widespread, libraries relied upon an ingenious system known as the card catalog. Rows upon rows of small wooden drawers filled entire rooms. Inside each drawer were thousands of carefully typed index cards. Each card represented a book. Searching for information required learning how to navigate this system. One might search by title, or by author, or by subject. Locating the correct information could easily consume an entire afternoon. Many children growing up before the Internet vividly remember being sent to libraries to complete school assignments. Research projects demanded genuine effort. A teacher might assign an essay about ancient Egypt, the solar system, or the Industrial Revolution. Students would then journey to the library armed with notebooks, pencils, and considerable determination. Finding suitable books represented only the beginning. Relevant passages had to be carefully read. Important information needed to be copied by hand. Notes accumulated gradually over hours or even days. Photocopying machines existed, of course, but photocopies often cost money. As a result, many students simply copied information manually. This process was undoubtedly slower than modern Internet searches. Yet some educators argue that it encouraged deeper learning. Students spent more time engaging with source material. They encountered unexpected information while browsing shelves. And they developed valuable research skills. Encyclopedias also played an enormously important role. Many middle-class households proudly displayed complete encyclopedia sets. These collections often occupied entire shelves within living rooms or studies. A full encyclopedia set represented both a practical investment and a symbol of educational aspiration. Companies such as Encyclopedia Britannica became household names. Parents frequently purchased encyclopedia collections through installment plans, sometimes paying for them over several years. The books themselves were substantial. Heavy volumes bound in leather or cloth contain vast quantities of information on almost every imaginable subject. Need information about volcanoes? Consult Volume V. Interested in Shakespeare? Locate Volume S. Curious about whales? Perhaps Volume W held the answers. For children, browsing encyclopedias often became an adventure. Searching for one topic frequently led to discovering many others. A child researching dinosaurs might unexpectedly become fascinated by deserts, astronomy, or ancient civilizations. Without algorithms directing attention, curiosity often wandered freely. Of course, encyclopedias possessed one major limitation. They became outdated. Scientific discoveries, political changes, technological innovations. All of these rapidly rendered older editions inaccurate. Publishers attempted to solve this problem by issuing annual updates. Nevertheless, keeping information current remained difficult. Finding specialized information could prove even more challenging. Suppose someone wished to repair an automobile, or grow roses, or learn photography. The solution usually involved visiting a bookstore or library to obtain instructional manuals. Experts also played a crucial role. People frequently sought advice from professionals, neighbors, relatives, or knowledgeable friends. Human expertise mattered enormously. Need help fixing a washing machine? Ask a neighbor. Want advice about gardening? Consult an experienced gardener. Need cooking instructions? Call a parent or grandparent. Knowledge often resided within communities rather than digital networks. Telephone directories represented another indispensable source of information. Large printed directories arrived annually. These hefty books contain names, addresses, and telephone numbers for local residents and businesses. Many households kept telephone directories near landline telephones. Finding a plumber, electrician, restaurant, or doctor's office often meant leafing through hundreds of pages. Businesses competed intensely for prominent advertisements within these directories. Some purchased large, colorful advertisements specifically designed to attract attention. Travel information presented additional challenges. Planning a vacation required substantial preparation. Travel agents occupied an important place in society. Families frequently visited travel agencies, where professionals provided brochures, maps, recommendations, and booking assistance. Entire vacations might be organized through face-to-face conversations. Even obtaining simple directions demanded effort. Road maps became essential possessions. Drivers kept folded paper maps inside glove compartments. Gas stations frequently distributed free maps to customers. Long journeys often began around kitchen tables, where families carefully planned routes using atlases. Arguments about navigation were common, and getting lost was not unusual. Indeed, many people accepted becoming lost as an ordinary part of travel. There was no calm electronic voice announcing, "Recalculating route." Instead, travelers stopped at gas stations, roadside diners, or local shops to ask strangers for directions. Surprisingly, these interactions sometimes created memorable human connections. Life before internet search engines certainly demanded more time. Answers rarely arrived instantly. Finding information often involved physical effort. Yet many people recall a particular satisfaction associated with finally discovering the information they sought. The search itself formed part of the experience. And perhaps, in a world overflowing with information, there was something quietly valuable about having to seek knowledge slowly. For modern people, instant communication has become so ordinary that it is easy to forget just how remarkable it truly is. Today, a message can travel across oceans in a fraction of a second. Friends exchange photographs instantly. Families living thousands of miles apart can speak face-to-face through video calls. Colleagues collaborate across continents without ever meeting in person. Before the Internet, however, communication operated according to entirely different rules. It was slower, more deliberate, and in many ways far more personal. For most of the 20th century, the telephone represented the pinnacle of long-distance communication. Yet telephones themselves look very different from those we know today. In countless homes, a single telephone served the entire family. Unlike modern smartphones, which accompany individuals everywhere they go, telephones usually occupied a fixed location within the home. The telephone might sit upon a small table in the hallway, or perhaps on a kitchen counter. Sometimes it rested proudly within the living room, attached firmly to the wall by a long, coiled cord. Entire families shared this single device. As a result, privacy was often limited. If someone wished to speak with a friend, there was a good chance that parents, siblings, or curious relatives might overhear portions of the conversation. Teenagers frequently stretched telephone cords as far as possible in hopes of finding a quiet corner. Many parents eventually purchased exceptionally long cords specifically for this purpose. Before push-button telephones became common, many households still used rotary telephones. Using these devices required patience. To call someone, a person inserted a finger into a numbered hole and rotated the dial clockwise until it reached a stop. The dial then slowly returned to its original position. This process had to be repeated for every digit. Calling a number containing many nines or zeros could feel surprisingly time-consuming. And if a mistake occurred while dialing the final digit, the entire process often had to begin again. Unlike today's phones, there was no contact list. People memorized important telephone numbers. Children often knew the home telephone numbers of close friends by heart. Adults memorized family numbers, workplaces, doctors, schools, and emergency services. Many households kept address books beside telephones. These small books contained carefully handwritten names, addresses, birthdays, and telephone numbers. Losing an address book could be genuinely distressing. The arrival of answering machines during the late 20th century represented a significant technological advance. Before answering machines, missed calls simply vanished. If nobody answered, the caller might try again later. Or perhaps not. There was no voicemail. No text message. No notification. Answering machines changed this. These devices recorded messages on cassette tapes. A tiny blinking light informed homeowners that someone had called while they were away. Listening to messages upon returning home became a familiar ritual. Many people still fondly remember hearing the mechanical voice announce, "You have 3 new messages." Long-distance telephone calls presented additional challenges. Today, international calls cost little or nothing. Before the Internet, however, long-distance communication could be expensive. Families often reserved such calls for special occasions. Birthdays, holidays, major life events. Children attending university sometimes called home only once each week because of cost. Relatives living overseas occasionally communicated primarily through letters. Writing letters remained one of humanity's most important forms of communication for centuries. Indeed, until surprisingly recently, letter writing formed an ordinary part of everyday life. The arrival of the Daily Mail generated genuine excitement. Postal workers traveled from house to house delivering envelopes, postcards, bills, newspapers, and packages. Many people checked mailboxes every afternoon. Personal letters carried enormous emotional significance. Unlike modern digital messages, letters required considerable effort. One first selected suitable stationery. Then came the process of writing. Pens moved slowly across paper. Thoughts were carefully composed. Mistakes could not easily be erased. People often revised letters before sending them. Once completed, the letter was folded, placed inside an envelope, addressed by hand, stamped, and deposited into a mailbox. The sender then waited. And waited. Domestic letters might require several days to arrive. International correspondence often took weeks. Yet despite these delays, many individuals considered letter writing deeply meaningful. Letters frequently express thoughts and emotions in ways that modern messaging rarely does. People described daily life in detail. They shared hopes, worries, dreams, and memories. Some families preserved letters for generations. Today, these collections offer historians remarkable insights into ordinary lives. Postcards also enjoyed immense popularity. Travelers routinely mailed postcards to friends and relatives while on vacation. A simple postcard might contain only a few sentences. Nevertheless, receiving one could brighten an entire day. Business communication before the Internet relied heavily upon postal services, telephones, and an invention known as the fax machine. Fax machines now appear almost antiquated. Yet during the 1980s and 1990s, they revolutionized office communication. A fax machine transmitted copies of printed documents through telephone lines. Contracts, invoices, letters, and official forms could suddenly travel across great distances within minutes rather than days. The distinctive sounds produced by fax machines became familiar in offices worldwide. Schools also communicated differently. Parents received announcements through printed letters sent home with children. Unfortunately, children occasionally forgot these important documents inside school bags, or misplaced them entirely. Teachers therefore developed a certain skepticism whenever students claimed, "I forgot to give this to my parents." Friendships likewise depended upon more deliberate communication. Arranging to meet friends required planning. Children often agreed upon meeting places and times while still at school. Meet at the park at 3 o'clock. Once plans were made, changing them proved difficult. There were no mobile phones, no messaging applications. If someone failed to appear, friends simply waited. Sometimes for quite a long time. Being late carried greater consequences because contacting others while traveling was often impossible. Many adults still remember calling friends' homes and nervously asking, "May I speak to Sarah, please?" Speaking first with parents was unavoidable. This practice could feel intimidating, especially for shy teenagers. Yet it also fostered social skills. People learned polite conversation. They became comfortable speaking with adults. And perhaps most importantly, communication before the internet generally demanded greater patience. Messages did not arrive instantly. Responses were not expected immediately. Silence rarely caused anxiety. People understood that communication simply required time. In many respects, this slower rhythm shaped relationships themselves. Conversations often felt more intentional. Letters carried lasting value. And hearing a loved one's voice after days or weeks apart could feel genuinely special. Long before social media platforms connected billions of people across the globe, friendships were formed and maintained in remarkably different ways. There were no friend requests, no followers, no group chats, no online gaming communities, and certainly no social networks capable of instantly connecting people separated by thousands of miles. Instead, friendship was overwhelmingly local. It existed in neighborhoods, schools, workplaces, places of worship, and community gathering spaces. For much of the 20th century, a person's social world was often defined by geography. One's friends typically lived nearby. Children played with other children from the same street. Adults socialized with neighbors, coworkers, or members of local organizations. The simple fact of living near one another often created lifelong friendships. In countless neighborhoods around the world, children spent enormous amounts of time outdoors. After returning home from school, many children completed homework quickly, ate a snack, and immediately rushed outside. Parents often had only one rule: be home before dark. Entire afternoons could pass without adult supervision. Groups of children rode bicycles through quiet streets. They climbed trees, played hide-and-seek, built forts, invented elaborate games, played football, cricket, baseball, or countless other neighborhood sports. Children frequently wandered from house to house. It was common for one child to knock on a friend's front door and simply ask, "Can he come outside and play?" No text message was required. No advanced scheduling. No electronic calendar invitation. Friendships often developed naturally through repeated face-to-face interactions. Summer vacations could feel especially magical. Without smartphones or tablets, many children spent long hours exploring their surroundings. Vacant lots became kingdoms. Small streams transformed into grand adventures. Parks, playgrounds, and neighborhood streets served as social centers. Many adults today look back fondly upon these experiences. Not necessarily because life was perfect, but because friendships often felt intensely personal and immediate. Adults also maintained rich social lives. Neighbors frequently knew one another well. In many communities, it was entirely normal to visit a neighbor without prior notice. A person might simply walk next door and knock. If the neighbor happened to be home, an invitation inside usually followed. Coffee would be prepared. Conversations might continue for hours. Today, such unannounced visits have become considerably less common. Many modern households prefer advance notice through text messages or phone calls. Before the internet, however, spontaneity characterized much social interaction. Community organizations played a particularly important role. Clubs and associations flourished. book clubs, gardening societies, sports leagues, volunteer organizations, religious groups, community choirs, amateur theater companies. These organizations provided opportunities for friendship, personal growth, and social engagement. Participation in local organizations often formed a central part of adult identity. In small towns especially, community involvement could be extensive. Residents attended local events regularly. Church suppers, school fundraisers, holiday celebrations, and town festivals brought people together throughout the year. These gatherings strengthened social bonds. People knew one another's families. They celebrated milestones together. And during difficult times, communities often provided practical support. The local shopping mall also emerged as an important social destination during the late 20th century. For teenagers in particular, malls frequently functioned as informal gathering places. Groups of friends wandered through shops, shared meals at food courts, visited arcades, or simply spent hours talking. Parents generally viewed malls as relatively safe environments. As a result, malls became deeply woven into youth culture during the 1980s and 1990s. Movie theaters served a similar purpose. Seeing a newly released film represented a major social event. Friends arranged outings days or even weeks in advance. Because movie schedules were fixed, planning mattered. Missing the beginning of a film could be genuinely disappointing. Dating and romantic relationships also depended heavily upon face-to-face interaction. People often met through mutual friends, school, workplaces, community activities, religious organizations, or family introductions. The expression, meeting someone online, would have sounded quite unusual for most of the 20th century. Even maintaining long-distance friendships required considerable effort. Letters, telephone calls, occasional visits. These formed the foundation of many relationships. Because communication occurred less frequently, interactions often carried greater significance. A weekly telephone call from a distant friend might become an eagerly anticipated event. Similarly, receiving a handwritten letter could provide immense joy. Social isolation certainly existed before the Internet. Loneliness is hardly a modern invention. Yet social structures often encouraged regular in-person interaction. People encountered neighbors while collecting mail, spoke with shopkeepers while purchasing groceries, conversed with coworkers during lunch breaks, met friends unexpectedly while walking through town. Everyday life generated countless opportunities for casual social contact. Many historians and sociologists have observed that these small interactions contributed significantly to community cohesion. Knowing familiar faces within one's neighborhood created feelings of belonging and security. Of course, pre-internet social life also possessed limitations. Individuals living in isolated communities sometimes struggled to find others who shared specific interests. Those belonging to minority groups occasionally experienced profound isolation. Geographical distance frequently separated friends and family, and maintaining relationships required greater effort. The Internet has unquestionably solved many of these challenges. Today, people can form meaningful friendships regardless of physical distance. Communities exist around shared interests rather than shared geography alone. Yet many people continue to feel nostalgic for certain aspects of earlier social life. For the simple experience of children playing outdoors until sunset. For neighbors dropping by unexpectedly. For conversations uninterrupted by notifications. For communities in which people knew not only names, but stories. And perhaps above all, for a time when friendship was rarely measured in followers, likes, or digital connections, but rather in shared experiences, laughter, and time spent together. For most of human history, finding love required something that many modern people may find rather intimidating. It required meeting another person face to face. There were no dating applications, no profiles to browse, no photographs carefully selected to attract potential partners, no algorithms attempting to calculate compatibility, and certainly no possibility of speaking with dozens of prospective romantic partners simultaneously from the comfort of one's sofa. Instead, for much of the 20th century, romance unfolded in a slower, more personal, and often far less predictable manner. People generally met through the ordinary rhythms of everyday life. School represented one of the most common settings for young romance. Teenagers and young adults spent many hours together in classrooms, libraries, sporting events, and extracurricular activities. Friendships gradually developed. Conversations occurred naturally. And sometimes, friendships slowly transformed into something more. Universities also served as important places for courtship. College campuses introduced young people to individuals from different backgrounds and communities. Many lifelong partnerships began during these years. Workplaces provided another significant source of romantic relationships. In an era before remote work became widespread, adults spent large portions of their lives in offices, factories, shops, and workplaces alongside colleagues. Shared experiences frequently created close bonds. It was not unusual for marriages to begin between coworkers. Family and friends also played an enormous role in introducing potential partners. Parents frequently suggested suitable matches. Friends often attempted to introduce single acquaintances to one another. Such introductions could lead to highly successful relationships. They could also result in deeply awkward evenings. The blind date became a familiar feature of 20th century social life. A trusted friend might enthusiastically declare, "I know someone perfect for you." Whether this prediction proved accurate remained uncertain. Nevertheless, countless romances began in precisely this manner. Social gatherings offered yet another opportunity to meet people. Community dances, religious events, local festivals, parties, sporting events, neighborhood gatherings, all provided opportunities for social interaction. Dance halls held particular significance during much of the 20th century. On weekends, young people gathered to dance, socialize, and perhaps meet someone special. For many individuals, asking someone to dance represented an important social ritual. It required courage. Rejection remained a possibility. Yet the simple act of approaching another person often formed the first step toward romance. Once interest developed, courtship generally proceeded at a slower pace than is common today. Communication itself imposed certain limitations. Suppose a young man wished to ask someone on a date. In many cases, he telephoned the family home. This could be an intimidating experience. First, someone else usually answered. perhaps a parent, or an older sibling. The caller then needed to politely request permission to speak with the person he hoped to invite. Many adults still vividly remember the nervousness associated with such calls. One had little opportunity to carefully compose responses. Conversations occurred in real time. Shyness could not be hidden behind text messages. Telephone etiquette mattered greatly. Politeness, confidence, and conversational skill all played important roles. Dates themselves also looked somewhat different. A trip to the cinema remained enormously popular. So did dinners, dances, picnics, walks in parks, and attendance at community events. Young couples frequently spent time in public places. In many societies, social expectations encouraged supervised or semi-supervised courtship, particularly during earlier decades. Parents often maintained a keen interest in their children's romantic relationships. Indeed, some families imposed strict rules. Curfews were common. Potential partners frequently met parents early in relationships. This could create additional pressure. Yet it also integrated relationships more fully into family and community life. Long-distance relationships presented particular challenges. Today, couples separated by great distances can exchange messages continuously throughout the day. They can share photographs instantly. They can even speak face-to-face through video calls. Before the Internet, however, maintaining a long-distance romance demanded remarkable dedication. Letters often became the foundation of such relationships. Couples wrote frequently. Some exchanged letters daily. These letters might contain descriptions of ordinary events, expressions of affection, future plans, or simply reflections upon daily life. Receiving a letter from a loved one often became the highlight of an entire day. Telephone calls supplemented written correspondence. However, long-distance calls could be expensive. As a result, conversations were sometimes brief and carefully planned. The slower pace of communication undoubtedly influenced relationships. Absence could intensify affection. Anticipation played a significant role. Waiting days for a reply became entirely normal. Patience was not merely desirable. It was essential. During the latter decades of the 20th century, newspaper personal advertisements emerged as another intriguing method of meeting potential partners. Individuals placed short advertisements describing themselves and the qualities they sought in a companion. Responses arrived through the postal service. While such advertisements never appealed to everyone, many successful relationships began through these modest printed notices. Matchmaking services also existed long before online dating. Professional matchmakers introduced compatible individuals, often relying upon personal knowledge rather than computer algorithms. Of course, courtship before the Internet was not necessarily easier. Many people experienced loneliness. Meeting compatible partners could prove difficult, especially in smaller communities. Social expectations sometimes restricted personal freedom. And opportunities varied considerably depending upon culture, geography, and historical period. The Internet has undeniably expanded possibilities. Today, people can meet others regardless of distance. Shared interests can unite individuals separated by continents. Yet many people continue to look back fondly upon aspects of earlier courtship. The excitement of waiting beside a telephone. The nervous anticipation before asking someone on a date. The careful composition of handwritten love letters. The thrill of seeing a familiar face unexpectedly. And perhaps most importantly, the knowledge that every conversation, every meeting, and every moment together required genuine effort. In a world where communication moved slowly, relationships often unfolded slowly as well. And for many people, that slower pace gave romance a unique and memorable quality. For modern consumers, shopping has become an activity that can be completed without ever leaving home. Groceries, clothing, books, furniture, and even automobiles can now be purchased with a few taps on a smartphone. Packages arrive at front doors within days, sometimes within hours. Before the internet, however, shopping was a profoundly different experience. It was slower, more social, and often considerably more time-consuming. For much of the 20th century, shopping was not simply a task. It was an event. Many households designated specific days for shopping. Families planned excursions carefully. Lists were prepared by hand, often written on small pieces of paper attached to refrigerators or kitchen notice boards. Without digital reminders or shopping applications, remembering necessary purchases depended largely upon memory. And occasionally, memory failed. As a result, forgotten items frequently required additional trips. The local grocery store occupied a central place in everyday life. In smaller towns and neighborhoods, shopkeepers often knew their customers personally. They recognized familiar faces. They knew family members. And in many cases, they even remembered individual preferences. A customer entering the shop might be greeted by name. Conversations often extended beyond business. People discussed weather, local events, family news, and community affairs. Shopping therefore served an important social function. It provided opportunities for human interaction. Supermarkets certainly existed before the internet. Indeed, by the late 20th century, large supermarkets had become common in many countries. Yet even these stores differed from modern retail environments. Shopping generally required more planning. There were no online inventories showing whether products were available. Customers traveled to stores without knowing precisely what awaited them. If a desired item was unavailable, alternatives had to be found. Or perhaps the purchase would simply be postponed. Price comparisons were also more difficult. Today, consumers can compare prices from dozens of retailers within seconds. Before the internet, comparing prices often meant physically visiting multiple stores. This process demanded considerable time and effort. As a result, many families developed loyalty to particular shops. Trust mattered. A reliable local butcher, baker, or grocer could retain customers for decades. Specialty shops played a particularly important role. People frequently purchased meat from butcher shops, bread from bakeries, fruit and vegetables from produce markets, medicines from pharmacies. These specialized businesses formed part of the social fabric of communities. Many shop owners knew several generations of the same families. Children accompanying parents on shopping trips often received small treats. A piece of candy, a biscuit, or perhaps a friendly word from a familiar shopkeeper. Department stores represented another significant feature of pre-internet shopping. Large stores sold an astonishing variety of products under one roof. Clothing, household goods, furniture, cosmetics, toys, electronics. For many families, visiting a department store was an exciting occasion, particularly during holidays. The arrival of the Christmas shopping season transformed department stores into magical environments. Decorations filled windows. Seasonal music played throughout the building. Children eagerly anticipated visits to see elaborate displays. Shopping malls later emerged as major cultural institutions. By the 1980s and 1990s, malls had become important social spaces. Families spent entire afternoons wandering through shops. Teenagers gathered with friends. People visited cinemas, restaurants, and arcades. Shopping itself frequently became secondary to socializing. Mail-order catalogs offered another fascinating alternative. Long before online shopping existed, companies distributed thick printed catalogs containing thousands of products. Perhaps the most famous examples included Sears catalogs in the United States and similar publications elsewhere. These enormous catalogs arrived by post. Families often spent evenings browsing through their pages. Children especially loved examining toy sections. Pages became dog-eared. Desired items were carefully marked. Purchasing products through catalogs required patience. Customers completed order forms by hand. Payment was enclosed. The order was mailed. Then came the waiting. Days. Weeks. Occasionally even longer. Yet the arrival of a long-awaited package generated tremendous excitement. Opening parcels became an event in itself. Grocery shopping also differed significantly. Fresh food often required more frequent shopping trips. Many households lacked the enormous refrigerators and freezers common today. As a result, families frequently purchased smaller quantities more often. Some people visited markets daily. Open-air markets remained especially important in many countries. Farmers and traders sold produce directly to consumers. These markets provided fresh food while simultaneously serving as lively social gathering places. Without online grocery delivery services, carrying purchases home represented a routine challenge. Shoppers relied upon baskets, carts, bicycles, or automobiles. In urban areas, many people simply walked. Heavy shopping bags formed a familiar feature of everyday life. Returns and complaints also required face-to-face interaction. Unsatisfactory products could not be returned through online portals. Customers returned physically to stores. Problems were discussed directly with staff. Such interactions sometimes proved uncomfortable. Yet they also encouraged personal accountability on both sides. Of course, shopping before the internet possessed undeniable disadvantages. Travel consumed time. Selection was often limited. Finding rare or specialized products could be difficult. People living in rural areas sometimes traveled considerable distances to access larger stores. Nevertheless, many individuals remember certain aspects of pre-internet shopping with nostalgia. The conversations. The sense of community. The excitement of discovering unexpected items while browsing shelves. The pleasure of spending an afternoon wandering through bookshops or markets. And perhaps most importantly, the simple fact that shopping required people to leave their homes and participate, however briefly, in the shared life of their communities. In a world before online stores, buying even ordinary necessities often involved something increasingly rare in modern life: human connection. For modern audiences, entertainment has become almost limitless. At any moment of the day or night, millions of films, television programs, songs, podcasts, and videos are available instantly. Streaming services provide endless choices. Algorithms recommend content tailored specifically to individual tastes. And boredom, at least in theory, has become entirely optional. Before the internet, however, entertainment looked remarkably different. People still laughed. They still relaxed. They still sought excitement, stories, and companionship. But they did so in ways that often required considerably more planning, patience, and imagination. Television occupied a central place in many households. By the latter half of the 20th century, televisions had become common features of family life. Yet television itself functioned very differently from today's on-demand viewing experience. Programs aired according to strict schedules. If a favorite show began at 7 o'clock in the evening, viewers needed to be sitting in front of the television by 7 o'clock. Missing an episode could be deeply disappointing. There were no streaming platforms, no catch-up services, no possibility of watching later. Families therefore organized portions of their daily lives around television schedules. Entire households frequently gathered together to watch favorite programs. Parents, children, and grandparents often shared the same viewing experience. Popular programs became major cultural events. The following morning, friends and coworkers discussed the previous night's episodes. Millions of people watched the same programs simultaneously. This created a powerful sense of shared cultural experience. Remote controls themselves were once considered luxurious innovations. Earlier televisions required viewers to physically stand up and change channels manually. Children were often asked to perform this task. As a result, many adults fondly joke that they themselves served as the household remote control. Channel selection was also limited. In some regions, viewers received only a handful of channels. Even in larger cities, options remained modest compared to modern standards. Paradoxically, having fewer choices sometimes simplified decision-making. Families rarely spent long periods endlessly browsing. Instead, they simply watched whatever happened to be available. Radio remained enormously important as well. For much of the 20th century, radio provided news, music, sports, and entertainment to millions. Families listened while preparing meals, driving automobiles, or relaxing at home. Before television became widespread, radio dramas captivated audiences. Actors performed stories entirely through sound. Listeners imagined settings, characters, and events for themselves. This required active participation from the audience. Imagination played a crucial role. Even after television became dominant, radio retained significant popularity. Music programs, talk shows, comedy broadcasts, and sports commentary continued attracting devoted listeners. Music itself required physical media. Vinyl records remained popular for decades. These records, carefully stored and handled, occupied cherished places within many homes. Listening to music often became an intentional activity. People selected records thoughtfully. They placed them carefully onto turntables. Needles descended gently. And entire albums were frequently enjoyed from beginning to end. Cassette tapes later introduced greater portability. For the first time, people could create personal collections of favorite songs. The art of compiling mixtapes became especially significant. Young people spent hours recording carefully selected songs for friends or romantic partners. A thoughtfully assembled mixtape represented a deeply personal gift. Compact discs eventually replaced many earlier formats. Yet even these required physical ownership. Building a music collection demanded time and financial investment. Video entertainment underwent similar transformations. Before streaming services existed, families frequently rented films. Video rental stores became cultural institutions during the 1980s and 1990s. On Friday evenings, families often visited local rental shops together. Rows upon rows of videotapes lined shelves. Customers wandered through aisles, carefully considering options. Choosing a film could easily consume 30 minutes or more. Occasionally, disappointment awaited. Popular new releases might already be rented. In such cases, families selected alternatives. Browsing itself formed part of the experience. Children eagerly explored animated films. Adults debated choices. Recommendations were exchanged with store employees. Once a film was selected, it returned home physically. After viewing, it needed to be rewound before being returned. Failing to rewind videotapes occasionally resulted in minor additional charges. Many people still remember these experiences with considerable nostalgia. Books occupied an even more important place in leisure time before the Internet. Reading represented one of humanity's oldest and most beloved forms of entertainment. Without endless digital distractions, many individuals devoted substantial time to books. Public libraries flourished. Bookshops served as important cultural spaces. People discussed novels enthusiastically. Children often spent long afternoons reading adventure stories, mysteries, or fantasy tales. Board games also enjoyed enormous popularity. Families gathered around dining tables to play together. Games encouraged conversation, competition, cooperation, and laughter. Card games remained similarly widespread. Even simple games could provide entertainment for entire evenings. Outdoor recreation formed another essential component of pre-internet leisure. Children played outside extensively. Adults gardened, fished, hiked, cycled, or participated in sports. Communities organized local sporting events and recreational activities. Entertainment frequently involved participation rather than observation. Of course, boredom still existed. Indeed, children often complained of boredom. Yet many parents responded with a now famous phrase: "Go outside and find something to do." As a result, children frequently invented games, built imaginary worlds, or explored their surroundings. Creativity often emerged from necessity. Life before Internet entertainment certainly lacked today's extraordinary convenience. Options were fewer. Access could be limited. Waiting was unavoidable. Yet many people remember those earlier forms of entertainment with affection. The excitement of anticipating a weekly television episode. The pleasure of browsing a video rental store. The satisfaction of listening to an entire album. The joy of reading beneath blankets late at night. And perhaps most importantly, the simple experience of sharing entertainment together, in the same room, at the same moment, with the people one loved. Few modern inventions have transformed daily life as dramatically as satellite navigation. Today, Many people simply enter a destination into a smartphone and immediately begin following spoken instructions. A calm electronic voice announces each turn. Traffic delays appear in real time. Alternative routes are suggested automatically. And for millions of people, getting lost has become increasingly rare. Before the internet, however, travel demanded considerably more preparation. And getting lost was simply considered an ordinary part of life. For much of the 20th century, anyone planning a journey first needed a map. Maps existed in many forms. Some people relied upon folded road maps obtained from bookstores, automobile clubs, or gas stations. Others preferred thick road atlases containing hundreds of detailed pages. Many families kept these atlases permanently inside their automobiles. The glove compartment often contained maps, registration documents, and perhaps a flashlight for emergencies. Before embarking upon a journey, travelers frequently gathered around kitchen tables. Maps would be unfolded carefully. Routes were discussed. Distances estimated. Rest stops identified. Parents debated the most efficient roads. Children occasionally contributed suggestions, though not always successfully. Planning a long trip could easily consume an entire evening. Travel itself required greater attention. Drivers constantly watched road signs. Passengers often assisted with navigation. Indeed, serving as navigator became an important responsibility. One person drove. Another held the map. Disagreements sometimes followed. Many families still remember arguments that began with seemingly simple phrases. "I think we should have turned back there." "Are you sure this is the correct road?" "We're definitely lost." Getting lost occurred with surprising frequency. Without satellite navigation, wrong turns could remain undiscovered for many miles. A missed exit might add an hour to a journey. Travelers occasionally found themselves completely disoriented. When this happened, they relied upon methods largely forgotten today. They stopped and asked for directions. Gas stations served as particularly important sources of information. Travelers entered, purchased fuel, and then requested assistance. Employees often possessed extensive local knowledge. Similarly, small-town shopkeepers, police officers, and restaurant workers regularly provided directions to strangers. These interactions sometimes led to memorable conversations. Unexpected encounters formed part of the travel experience. Road trips themselves occupied a special place in family life. Long journeys required preparation. Parents packed food, drinks, books, games, and blankets. Children often spent hours gazing through windows, observing landscapes gradually change. Without smartphones or tablets, entertainment options were limited. Some children counted passing vehicles. Others played games. One particularly famous example involved searching for objects beginning with each letter of the alphabet. License plate games also proved enormously popular. Entire journeys could be spent identifying plates from different states or regions. Portable cassette players eventually transformed travel entertainment. Passengers listened to music through headphones. Audiobooks later gained popularity as well. Yet, even these innovations offered only limited choices compared to modern streaming services. Travel by air looks somewhat different too. Booking flights before the internet frequently involved travel agents. Travel agencies occupied prominent locations in towns and cities. Customers visited offices in person. Agents discussed destinations, schedules, prices, and accommodation options. Brochures filled waiting areas. These colorful publications allowed prospective travelers to imagine distant places. Travel agents performed valuable services. They researched routes, made reservations, issued tickets, and answered questions. For many people, particularly those planning international journeys, travel agents remained indispensable. Airline tickets themselves were physical documents. Losing them could create serious difficulties. Travelers therefore guarded tickets carefully. The airport experience was also rather different. Security procedures were generally less extensive before the early 21st century. Family members often accompanied travelers directly to departure gates. Lengthy farewells occurred beside aircraft entrances. Children frequently visited airport observation decks simply to watch airplanes arrive and depart. Train travel retained significant importance as well. Railway stations often served as bustling centers of community activity. Travel schedules appeared on large printed boards. Passengers consulted timetables long before journeys began. Missing a train could prove inconvenient. Without smartphone applications providing constant updates, punctuality mattered greatly. Urban navigation also demanded different skills. Visitors exploring unfamiliar cities commonly purchased paper maps. Hotels frequently distributed complimentary maps to guests. Tourists stopped frequently to examine street names. It was entirely normal to observe people standing on street corners studying folded maps with expressions of mild confusion. Locals often assisted. Helping lost visitors formed an ordinary aspect of city life. Finding businesses while traveling presented additional challenges. Suppose someone wished to locate a restaurant. Today, reviews, photographs, menus, and directions appear instantly online. Before the internet, travelers relied upon guidebooks, recommendations, or simple observation. Guidebooks became treasured companions. Worn pages, handwritten notes, and folded corners testified to repeated use. Word of mouth carried enormous influence. A recommendation from a trusted friend could shape entire vacations. Weather information while traveling remained uncertain. Forecasts came from newspapers, television, radio broadcasts, or local conversations. Unexpected storms occasionally disrupted plans. Adaptability therefore represented an important travel skill. Of course, traveling before the internet possessed undeniable disadvantages. Reservations sometimes disappeared. Directions could be misunderstood. Finding accommodation during busy periods occasionally proved difficult. Communication during emergencies was more complicated. Yet many people continue to remember these journeys fondly. The excitement of unfolding a map. The adventure of exploring unfamiliar roads. The unexpected discoveries resulting from wrong turns. The conversations with strangers who offered assistance. And perhaps most importantly, the sense that travel itself remained an adventure rather than merely a process of following instructions displayed upon a screen. In a world before GPS, reaching the destination certainly mattered. But so too did the journey itself. For modern people, keeping up with the news has become a constant activity. Breaking stories appear on smartphones within seconds. Social media platforms deliver updates continuously. News alerts interrupt meals, conversations, and even sleep. The world now speaks constantly. Before the internet, however, news arrived far more slowly. And for many people, that slower pace profoundly shaped daily life. For much of the 20th century, newspapers remained the primary source of information. Every morning, millions of people stepped outside to collect freshly delivered newspapers. The newspaper represented far more than simply a source of headlines. It served as a daily window onto the wider world. International politics, local events, business developments, sporting results, weather forecasts, entertainment listings, all arrived together in carefully organized printed pages. Reading the newspaper was often a ritual rather than a hurried activity. Many adults began each morning with tea or coffee in one hand and a newspaper in the other. Some people read every page thoroughly. Others focused on favorite sections. The sports pages, the financial news, the crossword puzzle, the comic strips. Entire families sometimes shared a single newspaper. Parents might read national headlines first. Children eagerly turned to comics. Grandparents often examined local news. Newspapers themselves possessed a physical presence that digital news lacks. Pages rustled. Ink occasionally stained fingers. Articles could be clipped and saved. Important stories were carefully cut out and placed into family albums or scrapbooks. Major historical events often survived in households as preserved newspaper front pages. The assassination of political leaders, moon landings, royal weddings, historic sporting victories. These moments were literally held in people's hands. Television news later transformed how many people understood the world. For millions of families, evening news broadcasts became an essential part of daily routine. At a specific hour each evening, households gathered around televisions. News presenters calmly summarized the day's most important events. Unlike today's endless 24-hour news cycle, broadcasts generally lasted only 30 minutes or perhaps an hour. As a result, journalists carefully selected stories considered most significant. When the program ended, news coverage ended as well. There were no endless updates. No continuous commentary. No live blogs. People simply returned to their ordinary lives. Radio also remained enormously important. Morning and evening news bulletins informed listeners while they drove, prepared meals, or worked. In many rural areas, radio represented the fastest and most reliable source of information. Portable radios allowed people to remain informed while away from home. Farmers frequently listened while working. Drivers followed traffic reports. Sports fans eagerly awaited match results. Extraordinary events occasionally interrupted normal broadcasting. Special news bulletins carried enormous significance. A familiar television program might suddenly stop. A serious-looking news presenter would appear. Viewers immediately understood that something important had happened. Such interruptions often became unforgettable memories. Many older adults can still remember precisely where they were when hearing news of major historical events. The moon landing, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the death of Princess Diana, historic sporting achievements. Because millions received information simultaneously through the same sources, shared national experiences emerged. Entire societies discussed the same stories. People arrived at workplaces, schools, and shops already aware of major events. Conversations naturally followed. "Did you see the news last night?" This simple question frequently initiated discussions. Local news occupied an especially important place. Small-town newspapers reported community events often ignored by national media. School activities, local elections, birth announcements, obituaries, community celebrations, charity events. These publications strengthened community identity. Residents learned not only about global affairs, but about neighbors and local institutions. Classified advertisements formed another fascinating component of newspapers. Long before online marketplaces existed, people bought and sold goods through printed classified sections. Need a used bicycle? Searching for employment? Looking for an apartment? The newspaper classifieds offered possibilities. Personal advertisements also appeared. Individuals seeking friendship or romance occasionally placed brief descriptions of themselves and their interests. Before internet dating, these small notices represented surprisingly important social tools. Obtaining international news could sometimes prove challenging. Major newspapers certainly covered world events. However, information often traveled more slowly. A developing story overseas might require days before complete details became available. Foreign correspondents played crucial roles. These journalists traveled extensively, gathering information firsthand. Yet technological limitations inevitably delayed reporting. This slower pace had certain advantages. Journalists frequently possessed more time to verify facts. Stories often underwent careful editorial review before publication. Corrections still occurred, of course. Mistakes were certainly made. Nevertheless, the relentless pressure for immediate publication was generally less intense. At the same time, slower communication carried disadvantages. Breaking developments sometimes remained unknown for hours or even days. People traveling or living abroad occasionally learned important family news through letters or delayed telephone calls. The Internet has unquestionably transformed access to information. Today, anyone with a smartphone can instantly access newspapers from around the world. Live video streams bring distant events directly into homes. Information has become astonishingly abundant. Yet abundance itself creates new challenges. Many people now feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information. News arrives continuously. Notifications demand attention. Important stories compete with trivial distractions. Some individuals even deliberately avoid news altogether. Ironically, many people now attempt to recreate aspects of earlier media habits. They limit screen time, read printed newspapers, or choose specific times each day to consume news. Perhaps they seek something that earlier generations experienced naturally: a quieter relationship with information. A world in which the news arrived at certain moments. A world in which silence still existed between headlines. And a world in which people were informed, but not constantly connected. For modern students and office workers, the Internet has become so deeply woven into everyday life that it is difficult to imagine functioning without it. Assignments are submitted online. Meetings occur through video calls. Documents are stored in cloud services. Emails arrive continuously. Information can be accessed instantly from almost anywhere. Before the Internet, however, school and work operated according to entirely different principles. Tasks that now require only seconds often demanded hours. Communication moved more slowly. Organization depended heavily upon paper. And forgetting an important document could create genuine problems. For students, school life before the Internet looked remarkably different. Homework assignments were typically written on blackboards or announced verbally by teachers. Students carefully copied instructions into notebooks or planners. These planners occupied an important place in daily life. Without digital calendars or educational applications, students relied upon handwritten reminders. Forgetting to record an assignment could prove disastrous. A student returning home uncertain about homework faced limited options. Perhaps a classmate could be telephoned. Perhaps not. Otherwise, the assignment might simply remain incomplete. Research projects represented particularly challenging undertakings. Today, students can access vast quantities of information within moments. Before the Internet, however, research usually began with a journey to the local library. Armed with notebooks, pencils, and determination, students searched shelves, consulted encyclopedias, and navigated card catalogs. Gathering information demanded patience. Notes were copied by hand. Important passages were underlined. Facts were organized carefully. Research papers often required several visits to libraries. Typing assignments also involved considerable effort. Many students wrote essays entirely by hand. Others used typewriters. Typewriters were remarkable machines, yet they possessed obvious limitations. A typing mistake could create significant frustration. Correcting errors required correction fluid, erasers designed specifically for typewritten pages, or complete retyping. Entire pages sometimes had to be rewritten because of a single mistake. Students therefore learned to plan carefully before beginning. Typing itself became an important skill. Schools frequently offered typing classes. Students practiced diligently, learning to position fingers correctly and increase speed. Classrooms filled with rows of typewriters produced unforgettable sounds. The rhythmic clicking of keys echoed constantly. Examinations also differed. Without online testing systems, almost all examinations occurred in person. Teachers distributed paper examinations. Students wrote answers by hand. Completed papers were collected physically, marked manually, and returned days or weeks later. Patience was unavoidable. The instant feedback common today simply did not exist. Teachers themselves worked under very different conditions. Grade books existed as large paper ledgers. Attendance records were maintained manually. Lesson plans were prepared by hand. Communication with parents usually occurred through written notes, telephone calls, or face-to-face meetings. Report cards arrived physically. Children often carried them home nervously. Parents signed them before they were returned to school. Office life before the Internet also operated according to a slower rhythm. Perhaps no object symbolized 20th century office work more completely than the filing cabinet. Offices contained enormous quantities of paper. Contracts, invoices, correspondence, personnel records, financial statements. Everything existed physically. Documents filled folders, boxes, and cabinets. Finding specific information sometimes required extensive searching. Entire professions developed around document organization and record keeping. Secretaries and administrative assistants played especially important roles. These professionals managed schedules, correspondence, appointments, and records. Their organizational skills often determined office efficiency. Communication between businesses relied heavily upon telephones, letters, and fax machines. A business letter might require several days to reach its destination. Urgent matters were discussed by telephone. Important documents were transmitted by fax. Meetings generally occurred in person. Travel therefore formed an important part of professional life. Business people frequently traveled significant distances for discussions that today might occur through video conferencing. Presentation technology also looked very different. Before digital projectors became widespread, presenters often relied upon overhead projectors. Transparent sheets containing handwritten notes or printed diagrams were displayed upon screens. Slide projectors remained popular as well. Presentations required careful preparation. Technical difficulties certainly existed, though they generally involved jammed slides rather than malfunctioning software. Computers gradually entered workplaces during the late 20th century. Yet early office computers lacked internet connectivity. They functioned primarily as sophisticated typewriters and calculation tools. Files were stored on floppy disks. These small storage devices now appear almost primitive. Nevertheless, they represented extraordinary technological achievements at the time. Employees guarded floppy disks carefully. Losing one could mean losing important work entirely. Data backups often involved making multiple physical copies. The concept of cloud storage remained unimaginable. Work itself also possessed clearer boundaries. When employees left offices, communication generally ceased. Colleagues could not easily contact one another during evenings or weekends. There were no work emails arriving at midnight. No instant messages demanding immediate attention. Home and workplace remained more distinctly separated. Of course, this system possessed disadvantages. Urgent matters sometimes waited until the following day. Collaboration across great distances proved difficult. Information traveled slowly. Administrative tasks consumed substantial time. Yet many people remember certain aspects of pre-internet school and work life fondly. The quieter pace. The absence of constant notifications. The satisfaction of completing tasks without interruption. And perhaps most importantly, the simple ability to leave work behind at the end of the day. In a world before digital connectivity, school and work certainly required greater effort. But when the school bell rang or the office doors closed, people often experienced something increasingly rare in modern life. They truly disconnected. For many people today, banking has become almost invisible. A salary arrives electronically. Bills are paid automatically. Balances can be checked instantly on smartphones. Money moves across the world in seconds. And for millions, visiting a physical bank branch has become increasingly rare. Before the internet, however, managing money required a great deal more effort. Banking was not something one did casually while sitting on the sofa. It usually required an actual journey. For much of the 20th century, visiting the local bank formed a regular part of adult life. Banks occupied prominent positions in towns and cities. Their buildings often conveyed stability and permanence. Large stone facades, impressive columns, and heavy doors were common architectural features. These buildings were deliberately designed to inspire confidence. After all, people entrusted banks with something deeply important: their savings. Bank branches operated according to fixed business hours. Customers generally needed to visit during the working day. This occasionally created difficulties. Employees sometimes arranged lunch breaks or took time away from work simply to conduct routine banking. Upon entering a bank, customers frequently joined the queue. Waiting patiently formed an accepted part of the experience. Eventually, a teller sitting behind a counter assisted each customer personally. These interactions often became familiar. In smaller communities especially, bank employees frequently knew customers by name. Long-standing relationships developed. Many individuals conducted business with the same bank branch for decades. Savings accounts functioned somewhat differently as well. Many banks issued passbooks. These small books contained records of deposits, withdrawals, and account balances. Whenever customers visited the bank, tellers updated the passbook using special printing machines. Watching new transactions appear within the passbook provided a tangible sense of financial progress. Some people carefully preserved these books for many years. Cash played a much larger role in everyday life. Today, electronic payments dominate many economies. Before the Internet, however, cash remained king. People routinely carried significant amounts of physical currency. Weekly wages were sometimes paid in cash. Household budgets often depended upon envelopes containing money allocated for groceries, utilities, and other expenses. Running out of cash presented immediate challenges. Automatic teller machines, or ATMs, gradually transformed banking during the late 20th century. Initially, many people viewed these machines with suspicion. The idea that a machine could dispense money seemed extraordinary. Yet ATMs quickly became enormously popular. For the first time, customers could access cash outside normal banking hours. Nevertheless, ATMs possessed limitations. Networks were smaller. Machines occasionally ran out of cash. And many people remained cautious about relying entirely upon them. Paying bills also required considerably more effort. Today, bills can often be settled automatically. Before the Internet, however, households usually received physical bills through the postal service. Electricity, telephone, water, insurance. Each month, envelopes arrived containing statements and payment instructions. Many adults developed elaborate systems for organizing these documents. Kitchen drawers, filing cabinets, and desk organizers filled with bills and receipts became commonplace. Payment itself frequently involved writing checks. Checks represented one of the most important financial instruments of the 20th century. A checkbook accompanied many adults everywhere. Writing a check required care. The amount needed to be written both numerically and in words. Dates, signatures, and recipient names had to be correct. Mistakes occasionally required voiding the check and beginning again. Balancing a checkbook formed another essential financial skill. Because account balances could not be checked instantly, individuals maintained written records of transactions, deposits, withdrawals, checks. Everything was recorded manually. Failure to maintain accurate records occasionally resulted in unpleasant surprises. Many people devoted time each month to carefully reconciling bank statements with personal records. Household budgeting itself often felt more tangible. Cash physically left wallets. Checks physically disappeared. Receipts accumulated. These physical experiences sometimes made spending more visible. Shopping with credit cards certainly existed. Yet approval processes operated more slowly. Many merchants used mechanical devices known as credit card imprinters. These machines created paper copies of card details by pressing carbon paper against embossed card numbers. Customers signed receipts manually. Verification sometimes occurred by telephone. Large purchases occasionally required additional authorization. Transferring money internationally could prove particularly complicated. International bank transfers frequently required extensive paperwork. Processing times measured in days rather than seconds. People sending money abroad often relied upon specialized financial services. Financial advice also looked different. Today, individuals can access enormous quantities of financial information online. Before the Internet, people frequently relied upon bank employees, financial advisors, newspapers, books, or family members. Conversations played an important role. Experience and personal relationships mattered greatly. Of course, banking before the Internet possessed numerous inconveniences. Transactions consumed time. Mistakes could be difficult to correct. Bank visits were unavoidable. Records required careful maintenance. Yet many people remember certain aspects of earlier banking with affection. The friendly conversations with familiar tellers. The reassuring weight of a passbook. The satisfaction of balancing household accounts successfully. And perhaps most importantly, the slower pace. Money management required attention and deliberate action. In a world before online banking, financial life may have been less convenient. But it was also undeniably more tangible. People could quite literally hold their finances in their hands. As evening approached in a world before the Internet, life often began to slow down. The working day ended. Schools emptied. Shops gradually closed their doors. And families, having spent much of the day apart, slowly returned home. For many people, evenings represented the heart of family life. Today, it is common for each member of a household to retreat to separate rooms, each carrying their own personal screen. One person may watch videos on a smartphone. Another may play online games. Someone else may scroll endlessly through social media. Before the Internet, however, home entertainment was usually shared. Entire families often gathered together in the same room. The family meal occupied a particularly important place. Dinner was frequently eaten at a dining table rather than in front of screens. Conversations naturally unfolded. Parents asked children about school. Children described playground adventures. Family members discussed work, neighborhood news, upcoming events, and plans for the weekend. These daily conversations formed an important part of family life. Of course, not every meal was peaceful. Siblings argued. Children complained about vegetables. Parents occasionally became frustrated. Family life has never been perfect. Yet for many people, shared meals created memories that lasted a lifetime. After dinner, evenings unfolded in countless different ways. In some homes, Children completed homework while parents washed dishes or prepared for the following day. Others gathered in living rooms to watch television together. Television schedules strongly influenced evening routines. Popular programs frequently attracted entire families. At a certain hour, everyone knew exactly where they were expected to be. Favorite sitcoms, drama series, quiz shows, sporting events. These programs became shared experiences. The following day, coworkers, classmates, and neighbors discussed what they had watched. Entire nations often watched the same broadcast simultaneously. The experience of millions of people laughing, cheering, or crying together at precisely the same moment created a powerful sense of cultural connection. In households without television, or in addition to it, many families played games. Board games occupied an important role in evening entertainment. Monopoly, Scrabble, chess, card games. Countless evenings passed around kitchen and dining tables. Friendly competition often became surprisingly intense. Rules were debated. Victories celebrated. Defeats occasionally caused tears. Yet these experiences strengthened family bonds. Reading represented another cherished evening activity. Many adults spent evenings reading newspapers, magazines, or books. Children frequently read adventure stories beneath blankets with flashlights after bedtime. Libraries and personal bookshelves formed an essential part of domestic life. Without smartphones competing constantly for attention, reading often occupied a larger place in everyday routines. Music also shaped evening life. Families listened to records, cassette tapes, or radio programs. Some households gathered around pianos. Others sang together. Musical instruments occupied prominent places in many homes. Children often practiced lessons while parents listened patiently. Sometimes patiently. Sometimes less patiently. Telephone conversations frequently occurred during evenings as well. Because landline telephones served entire households, family members often took turns. Teenagers, in particular, became famous for lengthy telephone conversations. Parents occasionally expressed frustration when telephone lines remained occupied for hours. Some households even established rules limiting telephone use. Nevertheless, evening conversations remained important social rituals. Neighbors also played significant roles in evening life. People visited one another more frequently. An unexpected knock at the door rarely caused alarm. Friends, relatives, or neighbors might simply stop by for conversation. Coffee would be prepared, tea served, stories exchanged. In many communities, front porches functioned as informal gathering places during warm weather. Neighbors sat outdoors discussing local events, while children played nearby. Summer evenings often possessed a special atmosphere. As daylight slowly faded, children reluctantly returned home. Street lights illuminated quiet neighborhoods. The sounds of insects, distant conversations, and occasionally lawn sprinklers filled the air. Many adults today remember these evenings with deep affection. There was often a sense that the day had genuinely ended. Work generally remained at the workplace. School remained at school. Once home, people were largely unreachable. There were no work emails arriving late at night. No constant notifications. No endless stream of information demanding attention. Bedtime routines also looked different. Many households developed familiar rituals. Children bathed. Pajamas appeared. Stories were read aloud. Parents tucked children into bed. Some children listened to radio programs before falling asleep. Others drifted off while reading. Adults might spend a final few minutes reading books or newspapers before switching off bedside lamps. And then, gradually, homes became quiet. No glowing smartphone screens illuminated dark bedrooms. No late-night scrolling delayed sleep. The day simply ended. Life before the internet certainly possessed inconveniences. Communication moved slowly. Information was harder to obtain. Many tasks required considerably greater effort. Yet as we look back upon those pre-internet evenings, many people remember something that now feels increasingly precious. A slower rhythm. A quieter home. More uninterrupted time with family. And perhaps, most importantly, the comforting feeling that once the lights were turned off and the house grew still, the outside world could wait until morning. Good night.